And hello, Clear Vision Wednesday. Hello, YouTube tribe. It's Claudia Mühlenweg, your favorite vision teacher, I was about to say. I hope that's the case, but if not, there's lots of other great vision teachers. I am the founder of Holistic Vision and the creator of the Naturally Clear Vision method. And today's episode is about habits. And habits is a really, really important topic that implies direct consequences for vision improvement. And I want to share this a little bit before I dive into the science. And I want to give credit to the people whose research I'm going to be using in addition to my own experience. But really, I heard an ophthalmologist at a summit, one of those online summits, and she said, well, if the Bates method would work or vision improvement would work, then we would all be doing it. And I thought to myself, first of all, mistake one of her statement is, and I'm not talking about her in particular, but in general, that the eye care industry in general still ridicules that concept that we can improve our eyesight naturally despite advances in neuroscience, showing that this is true. So far, nothing that Bates ever said has been disproven. So that's one thing, but that's not the topic I want to talk about today. But the second mistake of her statement is that doing natural vision improvement means behavior change, right? It means stopping things that we've been doing, like staring and making an effort to see and making changes. And the concept, behavior change is always harder. Not that with what you learn today, it will hopefully be easier, but it's always harder than the quick fixes. And I put that in air quotation marks because like glasses, contacts, or surgery don't fix anything, right? They don't actually correct your vision. LASIK might do that for a few years or maybe a decade, but after that, you're going to have problems again. So those are all Band-Aids. And that's kind of what I found was the mistake with that statement. And I think that's one reason, apart from the fact that, again, the eye care industry has actively done everything possible to keep this kind of underground and even illegal in some places to teach, people having been sued and everything. But again, that's not the topic of today. So let's dive into habits. And basically, I used to make this big mistake with my own habits. I was like, black and white, it has to be done perfect or none at all, right? I was like, nothing of that little bit here or there. Like that was like my thinking. And this is how I approached teaching. Also, when I started teaching natural vision improvement, I always wanted to be like I was myself. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be better. I wanted to, do the maximum. Like, how many minutes should I palm? You should palm 30 minutes. Like that was how I started teaching. And you might be saying, well, what's wrong with learning more and getting better at and constantly improving things and wanting to, get better overall? Well, here's the thing. If it's so impossible to keep up, if you're like, working so hard and you never stop, you will eventually fail and then you will feel bad about yourself. You feel overwhelmed, you feel like a failure. Another day I didn't do this thing, or you might very likely to give up, or you blame yourself for like whatever favorite word you use to criticize yourself. I'm too stupid, I'm too lazy. I just knew it didn't work for me. Everybody else, I hear all these stories, but I just knew it wouldn't work for me. So that's why it's so wrong to do this all or nothing approach, really. I'm just looking at my YouTube feed, and if for some reason I don't see my live feed, I just want to make sure it's actually working. Yes, it's working. Okay, sorry about that. I was just going to make sure. So let me look at my notes, get back to that. So yeah, today I'm here to share my single favorite model of behavior change and habit formation and how to break bad habits, and alongside other inspirations I have learned over the years and that I'm now working to bring into my teaching. So every time I teach my Naturally Clear Vision course, it gets better because I'm learning, I'm implementing from all these masters of behavior change. And my number one favorite system, because it's also a really great system, is this one. It's Tiny Habits. BJ Fogg, he is the founder of Stanford's Behavior Design Lab. So he is really the expert in behavior, and habits are obviously part of behavior. And but I didn't start here. I actually just met or found out about him a few years ago. So this is not how I originally started. I don't actually have the book, but the first thing that got me into habits was the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. And you might have heard of that book. And I put the links underneath, the actual names of all the books underneath in the show notes. So basically, what James Clear is saying in Atomic Habits is we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fail to the level of our systems. So we can have all these lofty goals, and we talked about goals a few weeks ago, but if we don't have systems in place, and this is where behavior and everything we talk about today will really get you to succeed. So that's like the gist of his teaching. And he has like 8 different little things I want to share with you that, that overlap. And at the end, I will give a summary of where everybody kind of overlaps, because it's basically the same. It's the same. It's human. It's neuroscience. It's psychology, right? It's like, it's not like one person is right or wrong. These things work because how we humans are wired. But basically, the key piece first, and PJ Fogg calls it prompts, but he calls it cues or trigger stimuli. So, when it's dark and you're inside, you switch on the light. When you are waking up, you might be making coffee. Like, we all have these kind of trigger habits. We have little things that we automatically do. Our bladder is full, you go to the bathroom, right? The second thing I learned from Atomic Habits in terms of, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but installing good habits is to change your environment. Like, for instance, with vision, I always talk about when people say, oh, my computer, my eye strain, and like, how is your computer positioned? Well, it's against the wall. I'm like, and is there a window? No, but there's a window on the other side. I'm like, well, do what I did, change your office design if you can. If you're not, if you're working in a cube, that might be challenging, but put the computer at the window so that you can easily look outside. So you basically, if you change your environment to be supportive of whatever habits you want to instill, right? Or like he gives the example in the book, if you want to run more, leave the running shoes out. Or what I always say, if you want to palm more, then set up your most favorite chair to do the palming. I have a little palming stick that's outside that I see all the time. If you want to do more ball rolling, you got my little balls, right? If you want to do more of the myofascial release, I have these balls, not in the toe, but in my bathroom, on the bathroom floor. So when I brush my teeth, it's easy. I stand on the balls and, immediately I massage my feet. So that's the second thing I learned from Atomic Habits. And then it's really about strengthening your cues with implementation intention. So we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into that, but that is a really clear, specific plan. What habit do you actually want to accomplish? Like, what exactly do you want to do? And PJ Fogg talks about this in more detail, and I'm going to share that later. But it's really important to be super specific, not like I just want to be less stressed or I want to relax more. That's way too vague. And then another key piece of all these methods is that motivation needs the anticipation of a reward. So you basically want to make habits attractive with temptation building, and his bundling, he calls it temptation bundling. So in the book, Atomic Habits, he said, let's say you catch yourself watching Netflix too much. You could say, I can only watch Netflix when I'm running, when I'm at the gym, where they have the big screens. Or you can kind of tie these habits together to something else. So something that you want to avoid, you tie it to something that's good. And then this is also a really important piece. Make good behaviors easy by reducing friction. So again, the example in his book is, if you are somebody who finds it important or wants to build the habit of sending a birthday card to your friends, then have a bunch of birthday cards sitting in your house so that you don't have to go to the store, buy a card, buy a stamp, so that you have stamps and cards sitting there, and all you have to do is open one up, pick one, and then write the card. So that's an example of, and again, in vision improvement, it would be reducing friction would be if you live in a climate where there's not much sunlight, maybe you have a flashlight handy, in your desk drawer, and you can do some sunning, while you're at your desk. So you don't have to be like, oh, there's no sunlight, I can't do sunning. And, those are kind of simple examples. And you do want to increase the friction for bad behaviors. So let's say you want to watch less TV. Maybe you take the batteries out of the remote control, or like staring, like say you catch yourself staring. Maybe you, when you wear weaker glasses, right, you have to use better vision habits in order to, when you stare and do the bad habits, then your vision gets more blurry. But you get the point. You basically want to make it easier for good habits to happen and harder for bad habits to happen. And he talks about when you're pursuing habits with a delayed return. So if it's something where you don't get that instant gratification, where I'm trying to think of an example right now. But basically, you want to reward yourself with something else that gives you instant gratification. And I will talk, BJ Fogg talks about this a lot in his recipes. He calls it the tiny habit recipes, how important the gratification or the celebration really is. And then lastly, James Clear talks about creating a framework. And this is really where I find Fogg's model so simple. This ABC recipe is such a simple model that, even if you don't study all this stuff, you don't forget because it's so simple. All right, so let's switch gears to tiny habits. And so basically, his main thought here is consider what you are motivated to do and what you can do. The higher the motivation, the harder the habit can be. However, as humans, we prefer doing easy stuff, right? So that's the whole idea of tiny habits. It's easier to start with little tiny habits. And he has this model that he calls, and I wish I had slides, but I didn't have time to get them ready. I can maybe show something from his book. But basically, the way it's designed is that you have this curve. Let me see if I have a good example here. Yeah, for instance, he basically had this model. It's called behavior equals MAP. And let me just talk about it first. So MAP is an acronym. M stands for motivation, A stands for ability, and P stands for prompt, what James Clear was calling the trigger. So basically, behavior happens when motivation, ability to do something, and the prompt come together. So an example is, let's say a behavior I want to relax my tight neck and shoulders, right? Motivation could be I want to improve my eyesight because I know this tension in my neck is really not bringing enough oxygen to my head. Ability, let's say you did one of my programs, it was easy to click in a link in an email because there is a little rollout that I provided you. So you just click the link in an email, easy. And then the prompt was that I sent you that email. You opened that email, you saw the thing, it was easy to click, and you followed the routine. Or another example is, let's say you want to practice color of the day, which is a practice I teach to be more aware in the present moment, to focus on what you can see without your glasses. So you're looking for a specific color. Let's say you want to do that. Well, the ability to look for colors is easy, right? That's easy. There's no challenge in looking around like if you say, I want to look for red, looking around what you see in red, that's not a hard thing to do. And the prompt could be, maybe you put a Post-it on your bathroom mirror in the morning, or maybe in the evening, you pick a color, you write it on a Post-it, or you write it down, or you put something out in that color. And so that's the prompt. That makes it super easy to do that. And so basically he has in his book, he has this kind of curve. And so basically, let me see if I can show this. And I don't know if it's reflected. I know this is a copyrighted material, so please get the book. But basically, on the left here, you find the motivation, low motivation, high motivation, right? And easy to do, hard to do. Excuse me. So if you have a lot of motivation, right, everything above this curve is stuff you do, and everything below this curve is what you don't do. So if it's hard to do and your motivation is low, you're not going to do it. If it's easy to do and your motivation is low, you're not going to do it, right? So you have to have, depending on where this falls on the spectrum. So that's the kind of his model. And I think it's so super simple, and you don't even need the curve. But basically, think of motivation and ability are like a teeter-totter, right? So they're basically connected. The more motivated you are, the more likely you're going to do this habit. And it can be harder, right? So like say something like in vision improvement, converging, diverging, or the Brock string, or something that is not easy for you to do. If you're really motivated, you have amblyopia or strabismus, or one eye is weak, and you're like, I'm super motivated to get my eyes balanced out, then I'm going to do this practice that even though it's not easy to do. And the easier a habit, right, the higher the chances are, and generally, that you adopt it. So for instance, blinking. Blinking is an easy habit, right? That doesn't take any effort, just reminding yourself to blink. So that's easier to implement than, let's say, practicing converging or diverging. And obviously in reverse, the less motivated you are, or the harder the habit is, the less likely you're going to do it. So, and then he talks a little bit about, so what affects how hard a habit is? And I want to give you the example. Let's say what I said in the beginning. I want my clients to do 20 minutes of palming because I know 20 minutes is going to give them better results than 2 minutes. I just know that. Let's say somebody has an eye disease, they're very anxious, 20 minutes will be better. So now look at the factors that he lists, like time, money, energy, physical capacity, and schedule. And I know time and schedule overlaps, but these are kind of the most common kind of 5, obstacles, so to speak. So let's say you want to do 20 minutes of palming. Is time a concern? Probably, yes. Money, not really. Physical ability could be, if it's not comfortable, if your hands hurt or you cannot sit that long, physical ability could be an objection or a problem. Mental energy could also be a problem because your thoughts could drift to your to-do list and you're like, how many more minutes do I have to sit here to do this? And schedule, right? Obviously, if your schedule is packed, you have meetings or you have other obligations, then 20 minutes of palming is quite challenging to pull off. So the idea of tiny habits is, and that's something that Atomic Habits also talks about, I didn't mention that yet, but that idea of the 2-minute rule, Tiny Habits doesn't call it 2-minute rule, but in this example of palming is, how about doing it for 2 minutes? Because it takes about 2 to 5 minutes for the optic nerve to relax. So 2 minutes would be long enough for you to see a difference. Because again, a habit where you do something and you don't see any positive changes. Like have you ever been on a diet where you do your best, you don't eat any bad stuff? I've done this many times because I didn't know back then how to do it. But I wouldn't eat any sugar for 7 weeks. I would exercise every day and not a pound dropped. And are you going to continue that habit if weight loss was your goal? No. You're like, this sucks. Like, why would I do that? If I can eat my cake and I keep my weight. And again, I'm using diet in this case as an example because it's easy to understand. So Fogg talks about how no behavior ever happens without a prompt. And I was like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But here, think about it. So a prompt is a very specific thing that triggers an event. An alarm clock wakes you up. The bladder is full. You fill your coffee maker with water. That's a prompt. That's some action that you're taking. That's the trigger. You put toothpaste on your toothbrush before you brush your teeth. So when you say, so that's why he's so specific with his prompt. Instead of saying, when I brush my teeth, no. When you put the toothpaste on your toothbrush, that's the exact event in his recipes. When you get a text message, that's a prompt. When you see a notification, when the phone rings, when you hear the trash collection truck outside, you're like, oh, damn, I didn't put the trash cans outside, right? When you put your glasses on or when you take them off. So all these things are prompts. And basically, this model is built on the idea that you want to design prompts that you automatically do. Again, you get up every morning, you go to the bathroom, like there's a lot of things we do each day that we do automatically, like we brush our teeth, at least most of us do, right? So use these prompts to trigger desired behaviors. And also think about, let's say you have a new behavior that you want to do, like palming, and you only want to do palming once a day. And then it's easier to attach it to something that you do once a day. Let's say the moment I open my eyes, or the moment I have flushed the toilet in the morning, the first time I went to the bathroom, I'm going to do palming. But let's say you want to do palming several times a day. Then you could do it, like I call this pee and palm. You could say, every time I pee, I'm going to do some palming, because now you have this prompt, because you're going to go to the bathroom more than once a day. But if you only want to do it once a day, you could say, the first time I flush the toilet, or the first time I'm going to the bathroom in the morning is when I'm going to palm. So I hope that makes sense, that you kind of, this is what James Clear talked about, also these systems, get really clear what behavior, how many times a day, and then how can I bracket that or connect that with existing behaviors that I already do. Let's see what else in this topic here. So the recipe, yes, I want to talk about the recipe. So he calls it ABC, the Tiny Habit Recipes, and he actually has a free challenge that he runs every week, which I think is fantastic. I will put the link. If you go to tinyhabits.com, I think there's a link to the free 5-day thing that he does every week. It's all automated, but it's wonderful. It teaches you these recipes. And basically, A stands for anchor moment, or anchor is that kind of trigger the prompt. It's like kind of that going to the bath, like peeing, or putting toothpaste on the toothbrush, or when you first wake up, putting the feet on the floor. Like that's the anchor moment. That's like the foundation where you, okay, now, now you're triggering that next thing that you want to do. Then the B stands for tiny behavior. So the anchor, behavior. And then the last thing, and this is what James Clear also talked about, the celebration. It's super important, and he found that out with his own research, that if you don't celebrate that you did the good behavior, it's not the same. Like you want that emotional connection. So the celebration could be victory, or thumbs up, or yay, I did it, or whatever. You can jump up, whatever you want. It doesn't matter, but you have this ABC recipe. So the way it works is, after I, let's say, open my eyes, I will yawn and stretch, and I will celebrate by saying, I love you, right? So it's like ABC, it's super, super simple. So basically, when you design these things, it becomes so automatic. ABC, and how simple is this? And, he started saying in this book, which I think is so cute, it's like, after I brushed my teeth, when I'm finished brushing my teeth, I'm going to floss one tooth, because it's easier than to floss all of them. But you get the idea, right? It's like you create this little tiny habit to, like, for instance, your feet touch the ground in the morning. You are saying to yourself, it's going to be an amazing day. And then you give yourself 2 thumbs up or something like that. So now the last piece I wanted to talk about. So one of my favorite podcasts, as many as you know, is Dr. Andrew Huberman, who is professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford. And it's interesting because he had a whole thing on habits, but he didn't invite BJ Fogg. Now I'm just speculating, maybe, I don't know if they're not friends, because I was like, you're both at Stanford, shouldn't you be inviting the guy that founded the behavioral design lab? But anyway, so Huberman added a few cool things in there that I think are really interesting from the perspective of neurobiology, which none of the other people talked about. So he basically, his saying is, or the reason for this is, and I'm quoting him here, a lot of habit formation has to do with being in the right state of mind and being able to control your body and mind. And so Huberman, as a neurobiologist, thinks a lot about the nervous system and the circadian cycle and all these things. And so basically, he's adding this component of our natural circadian rhythm to this concept of habit forming and habit breaking and forming new habits or building better habits. And basically, he breaks the 24-hour cycle into 3 phases. And why is this? Because the energy to overcome procrastination, fatigue, anxiety, stress, from a neurobiological standpoint, not the other stuff, the money, the time, the physical capacity, but just kind of, our mental state mostly, really, right? Obviously our physical state too, but all these things change during the 24 hours of our day and night. So there's a difference in the different phases. And he calls this, and he coined this term, limbic friction. And limbic friction basically is based on our central nervous system, because we cannot be calm or stressed at the same time, right? So that this is polar opposites, like black and white. We cannot be both at the same time. And so with limbic friction, he basically describes how much effort and how much activation energy, how much motivation, what Fogg calls motivation, we need in order to engage in a particular behavior or habit. And that comes down to that, it's like the ability and the motivation in Fogg's model. So is it easy or hard to do? And so limbic friction changes over the 24-hour cycle, and leveraging the natural rhythms of our brain and our body makes it a lot more likely that you will do these good habits. So planning on kind of the different habits and what part of the day you should implement them. This is kind of what Huberman says. So basically, phase 1 is the first 0 to 8 hours after waking. So let's say you wake up at 6 a.m. So it starts from 6 a.m. plus 8, that's like 2 p.m., right? So from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. is like the first phase 1. And in that phase, you have a higher levels of cortisol, you have higher levels of dopamine, and this is kind of the motivation neuromodulator. You have higher levels of adrenaline, which put you into that kind of action mode. And those are all elevated and your level of focus is highest. So it's a lot easier to overcome what he calls the limbic friction, or the ability to perform a habit that you want to build. And specifically, and now we're looking at the different kinds of habits. So basically habits where you need a lot of focus, where you need a lot of motivation. Maybe that's exercise. Maybe that's writing a term paper. Maybe for me, that would be writing video scripts, like things I just absolutely hate doing that require my full mental capacity and focus. Like any kind of habit, but it could even be in vision improvement. It could also be practicing the clear morning ritual. Maybe that's something you're resisting, you don't want to, there's no time to roll on the ball. It's like palming, palming is very calming, but still just overcoming these things. So he recommends that you schedule 1 to 4 habits that you want to instill, that you want to start, and you don't have to do them all at once, but basically 4 habits, up to 4 habits that require the most amount of energy and focus. Do those in that phase 1. Like again, if you get up at 6, it will be from 6 to 2 p.m., 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. So that could, for you, that could also be my morning ritual. It could be doing mental focus work, maybe with weaker glasses. Maybe it would be working with no glasses if you can do that. But when you get more tired, you get more blurry. So you're more focused. When, like, in that state, you're more willing to do blinking, taking breaks. You're more, okay, I need to take care of my body. I'm going to step outside. I'm drinking more water. You're going to be more likely to kind of follow through on those things. And he also recommends setting a time window for each habit. So depending on what your habit is. So instead, let's say you want to do some reading without glasses, with weaker glasses. And he says, instead of saying, I'm going to start reading every morning at 8 a.m., he said it's actually better for your brain to say, I want to do reading for, let's say, 20 minutes, right? Of focus, I want to do this. Or if you look at the Pomodoro timer, they have you do these 25-minute chunks and then 5-minute breaks. So let's say 25 minutes, I want to do this particular habit, or maybe for 25 minutes, I want to do palming, whatever it is. But you set that time window, the length versus the exact time when to start, so that you have some flexibility in your schedule. And again, I think he doesn't talk about that, but I think having a clear prompt would definitely help with this, starting this habit, having this clear prompt. So again, for the clear morning ritual, that could be opening your eyes, or after you flush the toilet for the first time, or whatever you want to use, right? And maybe you get up the same time every morning, and maybe that would be the same time you start that habit, but maybe you varying a little bit when you get up. And so flushing the toilet is the prompt, and not like at sharp 6 o'clock, I'm going to do the clear morning ritual. So phase 2 is then the next 9 to 15 hours. So in our example, it would be after 2 plus another 8 hours to like 8 p.m. No, 2 to 10 p.m., let's say, right? So that's like that's like phase 2. And that is when we have higher serotonin levels. We want to kind of feel more rewarded. We have lower adrenaline. So that's kind of a phase where you want to do habits that require you not to overcome so much limbic friction. So in other words, habits that are easier to do, that you maybe like doing more, that don't require so much focus. So maybe it's journaling, maybe it's movement activities, shifting, swaying, swinging, all the vision practices that where you might even feel a little tired, and the kind of movement helps you to feel a little bit more energized. It could also be fusion practices. And I'm not saying they don't require focus, but it's not the same mental focus as reading or learning or other things where your brain has to be mentally 100% focused, versus if you're swaying, you don't want to do that totally absent-minded, like, I'm just moving around, but you're not requiring the same level of focus. It could also be stuff like the center patch that I teach, where you cover your central vision and you play with a ball, or it could be lazy eights, or anything that is more like a fun, playful thing. So you learn, and like maybe brainstorming. Again, journaling is a good thing to do in that phase 2. So basically, phase 1 is great for exact, precise habits where it's really important. Like say you want to determine your weaker diopters and you measure your edge of blur, like the things I teach. That's something you want to do in phase 1, right? You want to be really focused. You want to be relaxed yet focused. And in phase 2, something that's easier to do is that requires less motivation and less ability is what he recommends to do in phase 2. So for instance, that could also be when you do an online course, be it mine or somebody else's course, watching the training videos. It's not that you don't require mental focus, but it's a lot easier to just listen to something or be passive than to actually perform that thing that you learned. So that's what you want to do in phase 1, performing it, and then maybe consuming things in phase 2 that require less limbic friction. And then the phase 3 is obviously the last 16 to 24 hours after waking, which is where you should head toward bed to sleep. And that's when you reset your ability to overcome that limbic friction. So this phase, the last phase 3, is basically crucial because in sleep is where we regenerate all these things, and when we come back to the next day. And in this phase, super important, I talked about this before in other episodes, but avoid blue light, because blue light is preventing the melatonin secretion. You're not going to get tired. You want to also have no bright lights in general, even if they are not blue, no bright lights. You want to dim your lights in the evening. You want to have a really dark room to sleep in that is also cool enough. And you want to prepare yourself for sleep. And this is, again, where I found, for instance, the long swing to be really helpful. Like I had some students that had insomnia. And when you do that rhythmic movement or the swaying or the swinging, it's very calming for your nervous system. It's also, helping your eye movements. But that's a good thing to do. And then you get into bed and do some palming. You could also do ocean breath or any practices where you kind of induce the relaxation response by longer exhales, breathing into the belly. All these practices are really good. Gratitudes, like Fogg in his book has this example, and one of these recipes is like, when my head hits the pillow, I'm going to say a gratitude for this day that I just had, that I just finished. So this is a great practice, a time to do those kind of things. I also like if you struggle with sleeping, you can, Huberman talks about some supplements, but I really also like yoga nidra is something that's called deep rest, non-sleep. Yoga nidra is not meant to take you to sleep. It's actually meant as a practice, as a standalone practice that you can do in the afternoon. They say 1 hour of yoga nidra equals 4 hours of sleep. However, I happen to be in a platform where they teach it at 8 p.m. That's the time I go to bed. And sometimes when my monkey mind goes, all the stuff I have to do, doing a yoga nidra practice in bed and I actually fall asleep works for me. And I know that's not how you're supposed to do it, but I'm fessing up. I think it's a really great way to drift into sleep if you struggle with falling asleep. Better than taking melatonin. If you take melatonin once in a while, jet lag, that's okay, but you don't want to, take those things all the time to kind of, anyway. So now let me do a really quick summary about all this stuff, because there's a lot of overlap over the different things. So I haven't really talked much about bad habits, but how can you break bad habits? And it's really the same methods as starting a new one. So the first key is bringing a very clear awareness to the habit you want to stop. So for instance, and Fogg even gives a more of an example. He says, let's say a general habit is, I don't want to be so stressed. So you would put that in the cloud and then attach all the specific habits. What does it mean I don't want to be so stressed? So maybe like write down everything that contributes to your stress. So maybe it could be specifics like I'm putting too much on my to-do list. I'm checking social media every 5 minutes. I'm pressing snooze 5 times in the morning. I'm skipping my morning meditation. I'm putting sugar in my coffee. I'm leaving home too late. So get really clear on so not the big general ones, because those are elusive and you don't really know, how do I break those? I don't even know what makes me stressed. So get really clear on the specific things. And then you have a starting point to now you can actually address this, right? Once you have that specific habits, then you can start to say, okay, when I'm skipping my morning meditation, I'm going to be stressed. So now what do? I do my morning meditation. And the other thing is to increase the friction or decrease the ability, like in tiny habits. So again, decreasing the ability or increasing friction if you want to break a bad habit. So if you are, like, say, struggling, scrolling, so social media in the morning, like say you wake up and your phone is on airplane mode, and I've definitely been guilty of that. You turn on the Wi-Fi and then boom, you see the notifications. And before you even get out of bed and yawn and stretch and do anything and go to the bathroom, you're already looking on Instagram, right? I admit it, I've done it. it's a bad habit. So if you want to break that, how about getting an old-fashioned alarm clock and then putting your phone in the kitchen or something like that? Because then you can't do that, right? You would have to get up first to do that. So that's one way to decrease ability, to increase friction. You can turn on, let's say the scrolling is your thing, looking at the phone, only using those social media apps on the computer, turning notifications off, deleting the apps, whatever. But once you know exactly what the thing is that you want to break, then you also know how you can increase the friction or decrease the ability for you to do that. So eating sugary foods, really simple, right? You don't buy sugary foods, right? Stack the fridge with easy, ready to eat healthy foods. Maybe you make some kale chips, or you prepare these foods because you're going to have that snack attack in the evening, and instead of eating the donuts or the chocolate or whatever it is, you have something healthy that you can just pull out that's easy. Or maybe you can buy some store-bought good healthy foods that are easy to pull off. So, and if you have a partner that likes to eat sugary stuff, then tell them don't bring it. And if you do it, then hide it. I don't want to hide it somewhere, lock it up. I don't want to see it. And also, this is where Huberman adds another level on the bad behaviors that I thought was really cool. So he said, if you catch yourself doing that negative behavior, right? So let's say scrolling through whatever on the phone, you turn it on first thing in the morning, you're scrolling through social media, you already get upset. Because let's face it, no one here is perfect, right? Then make sure to do a positive behavior directly afterwards. So let's say, let's use the example of, let's say you've been impatient, you're like, okay, let me put my stronger glasses on, I don't, whatever. But then you're like, okay, you recognize this is a bad behavior because I didn't want to put those on anymore. So now you're like, okay, I did this thing again. I put my strong glasses on, or I scroll through social media, whatever it is. And then you double that up with a good behavior. It doesn't matter if you like it, but you're like, okay, every time I put my strong glasses on, I catch myself. I'm like, okay, no, put those away. Let's do some palming. Let's do some sunning. Let's do some swinging. So you're coupling a bad behavior that you want to stop by doing a good behavior right away, immediately after. So basically that when you've done, the idea is that now even though you did the bad behavior initially because you did a positive one, now you don't feel bad, you don't feel guilty, you feel great, you feel awesome. And maybe you even celebrate, and Huberman doesn't say that, but maybe you even celebrate and I say, yay, I did it. I did palming, and then you forget about the bad stuff. And the more often you catch yourself putting on the, okay, no, let me do this, the palming. So eventually the bad habit is going to drop away and you will just do the good one. So what else did I want to say about that? Yeah, basically this double habit is kind of a tethered together habit, and then eventually the bad one will fall away. And the idea here is that you are changing the neural circuits that are firing so that you can rewrite the script of that bad habit. So again, the bad habit before you're like, oh, I did it again. I feel so bad. I binged on the food. I did this. So when you do the good one, you end up with a good note. You do something good for yourself, and then you celebrate that, and you eventually your circuits, and you won't do the other stuff anymore. Lastly, summary of the good habits. Again, this is what everybody agrees to is get clear on your why, like why, what is the motivation? Like, why do I want to do something? Like, because if we don't know why, then there's no reason to do it. Then find that specific trigger, that anchor, the prompt, whatever the automatic existing behavior that you already do. And, let's say, I talked about that earlier, let's say you want to do palming once a day, then maybe hook it to first flushing of the toilet. If you want to do it 5 times a day, then, or or more, every time I go to the bathroom, I do pee and palm, right? So you build these things together, and then start tiny. James Clear talks about the 2-minute rule, but start with tiny habits that are easy to do. Fogg talks about floss 1 tooth, so do palming for 1 minute. Like, don't be a perfectionist. Reward yourself at the end, give yourself some instant gratification, and that's not eating a sugary cookie. But give yourself like thumbs up, yay, I did it, I'm awesome, I'm a rock star, whatever you want to do. But create these little recipes so that you have that emotional feeling of, I'm really happy, I'm excited, I'm doing well, that you're not relying on outside, sources of other people. I'm so proud of you. That's why we shouldn't say that to kids. We should reward them for the work they did and not for the outcome. That's a huge mistake I did in parenting, but that's another story. You want to reward people for their effort and for their work that they do, not because they painted a beautiful picture, because they sat down and painted, right? And then create this what Clear calls the framework or the system, and Fogg calls the recipes, the ABC recipes. So create these really clear formulas that you can even put somewhere, and then every time you remind yourself you do it. And then lastly, if you want to follow the neurobiology, you kind of figure out like which are the hardest habits, which are the ones that require my most focus, where I have the most limbic friction, where I'm feeling most struggle to do them. For me, that's definitely exercise or yoga. I just know if I don't do it in the morning, I'm not doing it. It's just period. I know I need to do that stuff in the morning, but other people are fine. For them, it's like, that's not a problem. So everybody is different. So figure out what works for you here. So that's basically it. It went a lot longer than I thought, but this is basically the summary of all my habit research. And this is definitely a book I can recommend. Atomic Habits is also a great book, but I think this is going a little deeper. And then also following Huberman Lab's podcast, doing the free 5-day tiny habit challenge is a good idea to do. And then follow my podcast, follow me here on YouTube, follow me on Instagram. So I'm looking at notes on you. No, there's no questions on YouTube. So hope this was helpful. And let me see if there's any questions here or any comments in my Zoom on my Clear Vision Club group that we can share with anybody that might be helpful. I don't see anything. Just said it was helpful. Okay, there's another book called What Life. Okay, I have to click the link. I can't really tell what exactly. But basically, oh, there's another book that I listed down there in the notes called Hooked. I forgot the author right now. It's in my YouTube notes. But basically, that book is more on the idea of if you're like if you do marketing, or let's say you want people to get hooked on, your app like Instagram. And it's very similar because we get hooked. Habits and getting hooked on something are very easily. And we're not talking about addiction here, physical addiction. But again, the same thing, there's a trigger. The 4th stage is a trigger. There's some event that gets you to try this product. There's the link that you get sent. There's the notification you got. There's the bladder is full, I have to pee. There's a trigger. Then the action, what we need to do, right, in order to use this product in this case, the reward, again, celebration, reward, and then also the investment. This is where like time, energy, like, mental focus, whatever. But the basic strategy is the same. This is the book Hooked is really more for it if you want to build, let's say, I'm going to interview a colleague in a couple of weeks who built an app for vision improvement, which I'm super excited about, called Oculox. And how do you get hooked? How do you get people hooked on using this app, for instance, versus not using the app? So that's where, having those triggers, having those things, but it's basically the same idea as building a habit. It's really the same thing. Just wanted to clear that up. So that book is not specifically about habits. It's more like what gets us hooked into things. And that also makes us understand why we need to break some of these bad hooks or bad habits, because they are designed, because they work with our neurobiology and our whole system of triggers, motivation, ability, and rewards. All right, you guys, I'm going to close the YouTube. I see you next week. Next week is my colleague Nathan Oxenfeld, and it's about how colors can help you improve your eyesight. And I'm super excited about his presentation too. All right.